I have your question. Hello and welcome to Sum It Up, Episode 3. I'm Joelle Martinez, President and CEO of the Latino Leadership Institute, and I have the privilege of being joined again by my friend and colleague, Harry Hollines, our Chief Strategy Officer. And I just want to remind everyone that Sum It Up is our time to come together as a community to tackle the tough topics in a real and authentic way. So I invite you throughout today's conversation to add your comments, your thoughts, your ideas, your reflection about today's topic, and we will absolutely be responding to all of those comments. Today's topic is one I know that Harry and I both find ourselves being kept up at night thinking about, but also one that I know gets us going each and every day, and that is Latino economic power. And I know, Harry, you have been waiting for weeks to come and talk about this. And, you know, the other night, as true form, I was lying in bed and I'm thinking about this topic, right? Money, wealth, power. And so often a 1990s hip hop song started replaying in the back of my mind as I'm thinking about economic power. Curious, Harry, any guesses as to what 1990s hip hop song was playing in the back of my mind when thinking about today's topic?
Man, 1990s are going to show my age. I'm trying to go back. So I would have been in college. God, because I know you love Eminem. We're going pre-Eminem. We're going
Pre-Eminem.
We're going way back.
Yeah.
I don't know. We're talking like the Run DMC era. I don't know exactly who it is, but I got the era right, I think.
You got the era. I totally thought you were going to go Wu-Tang, you know, cash rules, everything around me. But it's probably better, actually, Harry, you don't have insight into the inner workings of my mind in the middle of the night. And you probably never would have guessed this. And you just got to trust me and kind of roll with me for a bit. But the song that was playing in the back of my mind as I'm thinking about Latino economic power was the 1990 hit Salt and Peppa's Let's Talk About Sex. And I know you're like, where am I going with this? But the song lyrics that kept going in the back of my mind were don't be coy void or make void the topic. You ain't gonna stop it. I was just going in the back of my mind. And listen, the topic is very different, but I think the struggle is somewhat similar because what Salt and Peppa were doing with that song in the 1990s is they were taking a topic that had been taboo, not spoken about, not understood, and they were trying to put power behind it. They were trying to normalize it. They were trying to empower people with it. And I really thought about Latino economic power. And what hit me so much is that I know I'm not alone when I say that in my lifetime and in my life, and I think in the Latino community and in the culture in general, I don't think that money, wealth, and economic power are talked about enough, sometimes even at all. We didn't grow up, and Harry, love to hear it. Like, we didn't grow up thinking about this, right? We didn't grow up thinking wealth. I mean, and in all fairness, when many of us are trying to survive, it's hard to think about thriving. It's hard to think so bigly, so big about wealth and economic power. But Harry, as I sat there with salt and pepper in the back of my mind, it got deeper for me because I realized that not only is it a topic we don't talk about, that we don't normalize, that hasn't been empowered yet, but that throughout our lives, we got taught values that are really important that we still live by today, but maybe counter our narrative and our thinking around economic power. Things like Mija, work hard, be grateful for everything you have, and be humble. What was missing, right, was go build wealth, because wealth isn't just about money, it's about power. And economic power is a source of freedom. And our first step, which there is no one better than you, Harry, to talk to us about economic power, because in the last few years, you have single-handedly helped shape my mindset around Latino economic power. But I think talking about it is the first step. Normalizing it is necessary because that empowers us to where we can really begin to build and leverage this Latino economic power. And what I know to also be true, Harry, is that you are someone who's going to tell it how it is, how it could be, how it was, and of course, how it should be. And so I just cannot wait to dive in on this topic. So I guarantee you did not see that.
I did not. That was that was. I was expecting the fastball, and you threw a tricky curve. So we'll roll with it. But I think it's an incredibly powerful. And I'll just add just one thing to what you said around. We don't talk about this enough. It's very frustrating, I think, for you, me, hopefully for a lot of other folks. And it is because we come out of resistance and survival. And I think one thing we'll dive into here is we talk about wealth, and I'm going to get specific, and this is keeping it real in the United States. We tend to automatically think about individual wealth. What we don't talk about is wealth to build community wealth and community empowerment. And that does align with where we come from and where we think as a community, and we go down the wrong. So it's not, the power itself's not bad. That's actually a good thing, I would argue vigorously. But the question is, what do you do with it? And whether it's for individual means or community means.
Oh, I cannot wait to dive into that. I think what we need to do is set the stage a little bit more, though, because almost to the point where I get tired of hearing it, but we hear all the time about the Latinos in the U.S. and Latino GDP being $3.7 trillion. And listen, we leverage that data because it's a big data point and it matters. But what does that really mean? What does that really represent in your mind? What does that mean?
At its purest sense, it's our buying power, right? It's how much we buy in goods and products and services. And you put that in context, and that buying power would make us the 5th largest economy in the world, right? And so to put that in context, the United States is about 28 trillion of buying power. China is about 18 trillion. We are 3.7 trillion. That is significant. I'll tell you how significant this is. World economists consider a depression on a 10% dip in your GDP, not a recession, a depression. You think about the 1920s. You pull out our buying power, it does crush the US economy. Those aren't words. That sends us straight to a depression. And so that just shows the power of it. And within that, in the United States, 70% of our GDP is consumer spending. You bring that over to 3.7 trillion, and it means we are tremendously impactful consumer spenders. So we are a massive consumer base, and the economy is absolutely dependent on us. And one example I'll know is because we talk about this, and sometimes it's at a macro level and it's too big. And I love what's called single unit economics, right? Where you take some macro numbers and give a very specific example. Today, and I won't even name specific ones because there's multiple. There are retail chains in the United States where we, the Latino community, spend $1 billion a month. There are chains where we spend $1 billion a month, more than the economy of hundreds of countries and we spend it on a monthly basis. Just to give you an idea of kind of the position we sit in. And I'm going to stay with position until we move the discussion along, because I don't want to talk about power yet, because economic position and economic power are different. That's our economic position. That's the indicator of what our buying power is.
So I have a follow-up question on that, so you could do it. But yeah, I mean, as I travel around the country, I talk about this too. And I know the message that resonates so loud with folks, and clearly with folks as I talk about it, is, salsa, not ketchup, is America's #1 selling condiment. And, it goes beyond that. Tortillas outsell hot dog buns and hamburger buns. That consumer, that spending power is so significant. And I need you, though, to help me understand the difference between that significance as a position versus power. What do you mean when you say that? Why are those two things different?
Yeah, what I mean is, and I know, and we use that 3.7 trillion, that's for 2024, and we talk about it all the time, and we hear it on the news, organizations, and it's true. What I would say, though, is that GDP number it's an indicator. It's an output. It's an economic position. Economic power is when you leverage your position for a desired outcome. That's power. We can spend money all day long and not affect anything. Power is when you actually use your position to drive to an outcome. And that's what we don't talk enough about, what the outcomes are. And if we don't bridge the position and the outcome, then we're not going to change anything. And yes, we can always talk about we're powerful, we spend a lot of money, great. What comes out of that? And if nothing comes out of that, if that's the desired outcome, if the goal is for it to be nothing, then fine. But if we want to drive toward an outcome, if we want to empower communities, that's an outcome. And then that's where the discussion just begins. So to me, the GDP number the discussion just starts there. It's just an economic indicator.
I could not agree with you more. And it's where I get, a bit frustrated sometimes about it, because it starts and stops there. But I want to get into this notion, this idea, this concept of outcomes even more, because I think of outcomes both of what we are driving and what we're not driving. And it doesn't feel, again, from my perspective, that as a community, Latinos are fully leveraging our economic position to build and become more powerful. Again, this notion of we have, especially at a time, Harry, where so many of us are feeling powerless, we have an opportunity here to flip the script a bit and be empowered. So what do you say to that? Like, what do you say to these outcomes more specifically from your perspective?
I say, and I know it's not popular when I say it, but I'm gonna say it anyway. We're not leveraging our economic power to build more wealth in our communities. We're not, and the reason I can say that we're not is you start with tracking the circulation of a dollar. Communities that are wealthy and powerful, the dollar turns over in their community multiple times. In the Latino community, the dollar turns over anywhere from 2 to 5 days. It's 2 to 3 days in the Black community. In other communities, a dollar circulates 17 to 28 days. The Jewish community, the Asian American community, and the white community. And I'll give you an example why that is massive. It's not just a number, and I'll give what is probably one of the best historical examples. There was a neighborhood called Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, all Black neighborhood. And from 1906 to 1921, the dollar in that community turned over a minimum of 36 times and sometimes 100 times. And that meant that the dollar spent in that community didn't leave the community for 1 year. It kept circulating, meaning that someone in the community would buy something from a merchant in the community. The merchant would hire from within the community. The merchant would buy from suppliers within the community. This thing circulated. And for those who may have heard of Greenwood, it was the most wealth created in the Black community ever. I mean, ever. The average income of a family then coming out of that community exceeded what the minimum wage is today. That is how much it means when you spend a dollar in your community and it starts to circulate in the community. And we're not doing that enough. We're just not.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that when I was in New York at the end of last year, we really talked about. Again, people will throw out the GDP number, but not talk about what lies underneath that. And one of these is, are we actually spending money? Are we actually investing in? Are we allowing our own dollars to be to circulate in our own communities? And Edwin, just brought up an important point, one I know you and I tackle, but thinking about what happened in Tulsa, one of the themes I hear so often as I travel the country is Latinos are too diverse. We're not a monolith. We're hard to rally around anything. We're segmented, and so it's hard to kind of get the aggregate, the compound power that we could have as a collective. So how do you see that from your perspective, knowing both, and from both communities, how do we address that as the Latino community to really harness that power?
I think we have to challenge that. I think the beauty is that we're so diverse. There's like beauty in that. But I also think we have to challenge that because, and you and I have talked about this a lot, Joelle. I use that example of you've been in this work for a decade and much longer than I have. And we serve the Latino community broadly, come from different countries, political spectrums, economics. It's all over the board. I know one thing to be true. When we put us in a room at 9 a.m., at 5 p.m., the relationships are strong and they have transcended differences. Difference is good. We're not a monolith. We have different ideas. So then you kind of ask, well, there's a glue there that is about culture, that is about pride, that is about resiliency, that is common across the board. I call it this kind of horizontal commonness that we have. And I think from that, you can build and start to think about what your role is in building stronger communities. This is much bigger than what we think about on a single issue or where we come about politically. This is like just the core of who you are in your soul. And I believe and I hope that kind of transcends all of that. And I'd love to hear, because you've been at it longer than me, but you see these relationships build, and you've seen way more build than me.
Listen, I think it has been the best and at times the most challenging thing we've fundamentally done here at LLI. And that is, from the beginning, I said, we're going to build a very wide tent, because having traveled the country for as many years as I did, working with Latinos of all different backgrounds, speaking different languages, coming from different countries, having first gen and 10th gen and under the same tent is not always easy, because there are a lot of differences. And what we have found, to your point, Harry, in the last 10 years of doing 11 now, I guess, doing this work, is that if you build a wide enough tent, you spend enough time, you invest in what brings us together, what makes us stronger, it doesn't void the differences. It honors the commonalities. And I, for one, believe that we haven't spent enough time really building a foundation around what brings us together, what commonalities we share. And the fundamental thing that I have seen throughout all of those years and throughout LLI is that we are stronger together. When we rally, it makes a difference. When we come together as community, it makes a difference. And that has been our biggest asset and our biggest, victory as an organization, is we've cultivated a community of great differences mixed in. But I think the thing that keeps at least our community together is the ambition, is an unwavering vision and belief that we have yet to unlock our potential, but we believe in that potential, and that belief is what brings us together. And I think that makes me think about power again. It's a word we just have to keep saying over and over again, because I do think this moment that we're in, we can keep focusing in on differences or where we lack power. But when I hear you talk about Tulsa, and when you and I, not on camera, talk about this issue, we keep it as real could be, we really dig in and we really try to figure out, what is our power? What do we have control of today? right? Because I hear it. I hear the $3.7 trillion. And I also know the same year that number was given was the same year that we saw the largest wealth gap ever for Latinos at now 1 million plus. And so what do you think our path is, right? What do you think our path to being powerful is around ideas, around boycotts, around this economic position? What can we do today as a community, even with all of our differences and separated? What do you see in our fingertips in order to really leverage the economic position that you've described today?
I think there's, a couple things in one line, and I'm going to steal it that you use a lot, Joelle, and I think it's one we need to get our heads around as we think about economic power. You always can say demographics don't control destiny. And it's one of the most powerful statements that you say, and I think we need to get our head around that, because the first place we go is we say there's demographic shifts. That is true, but if we think demographic shifts alone are going to change the conditions in our community, there's not a direct line there. The demographic shifts alone aren't it. And we're talking very specific here about the United States. And in the United States, that's why we talk about the GDP and the economic power of the United States. It is one of the most powerful levers there is. And it's a lever that is touched everywhere all the time. And I think we have to rethink in this way. And I think how you bring us together. One, we need to build more bridges and get to know each other. So even though we have these demographics from California to New York, every single day, I know you and I are amazed, Joelle, at how many of us don't know each other. I mean, it is amazing. Every time we make a new connection, the power that comes out of that is really beautiful. But I think at its core, one way to start is if you understand what you can do with your economic position, it starts like the individual around. When I get up in the morning, I'll use my example. I do think about every dollar that I spend. Does that mean I can move everything? No. And I know we've talked about an example of if I need something delivered, I'm going to order something. Does that mean I can't go to Amazon? No, that's not the point. But what I can do, and I think what we can do, is think about where in our community can we start to move and recirculate some of our money. And when I'm here in Puerto Rico, there's a bodega down the street. There are things I have moved from the chain. I will buy my leche and my huevos and my other things from that local merchant, because I know when I go in there who works there, it's us. I know who owns it, it's us. I know who the suppliers are. They're farmers in Puerto Rico, it's Boricuas. Right there, my purchase has turned the dollar over 4 times. It starts there. So it's not that you have to completely restructure your entire life, but I think we have to rethink about every time I spend $1, is there something I could do, even if it's a little bit inconvenient, that I can actually move into our community, understanding that it's not just a one-time event. On average, when you actually move $1 into a community, the impact is 6 to 8 times if you spent that dollar outside the community.
I think that figure needs to be amplified again, right? And we know this not just theoretically, but in the practicality, because we do support so many Latino entrepreneurs. I'm wearing some earrings from one of our fabulous entrepreneurs today. And I thought about this during Christmas as I was making my Christmas list, something small, but something meaningful, at least to me. And that is, I could put anything on my list, but I would rather make a list of products made or that at least support other Latino small business owners. And, I remember, and I come from a family of small business owners, of entrepreneurs. So I know the struggle. I know how real it is, but I know the difference that is made when the community rallies behind those businesses, when we understand that we may not have complete choice of where we spend the dollars, because there are certain places you have to go to get certain products. But what if we made a commitment to be more consciously aware and more proactive about trying to put more of our dollars into our community and doing the research and leveraging what we do have control over and what we can do, because those, especially in this economy, and especially with what we're about to go through, and especially in a time when the narrative is not positive, when it's hard to find hope, I do think that the power and the source of all of that is ultimately going to come from this community, and that we have to be lifelines and investors in one another, I truly believe that is where the power, when I think of economic power, I know I don't have millions in my bank account, but for every dollar I spend, I want to make sure it counts. And I want to make sure I'm being intentional about being better about circulating those dollars. But it makes me think about, the boycotts and some other efforts. And, we've had, there's things happening to us and around us, and Edwin's talking about it, right? Like we feel like there's backlash, there's changing politics, there's this social economic reality that we find ourselves, and some of the instinctual power plays are things like boycotts. And I'm just curious, is that economic power, or is there something else that you think we should also consider?
I think I think when you had mentioned kind of the boycotts, Joelle, and I think, at least for me, and I think, I think others would feel the same. The basic kind of idea and concept of, I'm not really interested in spending money with someone who doesn't appreciate me and my community. Get it, 100%. Sign up for that all day long. But when we talked about power, meaning position and outcome, then when you start thinking about, okay, what is the outcome of our action? We can boycott this place, this person, this entity. That's step one. Step two is, what is the outcome we want from that? And if an outcome is we want economic empowerment within our community, then we have to build that bridge between, does this action drive that? And the most obvious example here is, I support the idea of the concepts, but I also support redirecting that money back into our community, as you said, Joelle. And in fact, there are retail chains where there are Latino products on the shelves. Last thing we want to do is harm a Latino business, but that doesn't mean we can't buy and reach that business. That's not the only avenue. There's other avenues, right? We can go in, we can go online, we can go places, we can find out who the merchants were within the stores. But I think that bridge now has to be, we have economic position. From that position, what outcome do we want? And the outcome needs to be clear. If there's not an outcome, then I don't, the action isn't going to drive anything. It's not empowering anything. So the empowerment's is not just our numbers. It's not just our position. The power aspect is when we say, I want to achieve an outcome or influence an outcome, and we call out what the outcome is as a group and as a community.
I think that this moment gives us that. Listen, it's hard. We've talked about it in our previous, but I think when your back's up against the wall and you're in fight mode, I also think that's when we are almost forced or compelled, however you want to look at it, to actually think bigger and do more and be innovative and have the real conversations, because there's short-term action and there's standing up for things that really matter. And then there's time for us to start getting to work, because we don't want to keep finding ourselves in a position where our future, our destiny is defined and described and determined by others. And going back to you mentioning that I say that a lot, the reason why I say that, Harry, is because I truly believe that destiny is not a matter of chance. It's a matter of choice. And more important, it's a matter of actions. And so the question before all of us as a community is, are we going to get real about really rethinking, owning, leveraging our economic position and turning that into economic power, and focusing in on the things that we share, our commonalities, bringing together as many folks who want to join us in these conversations, in amplifying what we have available to us and what we still need to create for ourselves as individuals, but for our community. So I really want you to help sum it up for me, right? Sum it up for all of us. How do we make this economic position work for us in a realistic way? Because we will have many conversations to come about the big picture, the macro, the long journey, but what can we do right now? What's something we can do in a realistic way to really move our economic position and make it work for us as a community?
when we get up every morning, hold each of us accountable on our spending. Like I said, the entire country, our economic position is based on consumer spending. We understand that. But every morning there is just a checkpoint when you think about your day, when you pull out your wallet, when you pull out your credit card, just think, is there a place, is there an avenue that I actually could move this spend into my community? Even if it takes a little bit of inconvenience, and let's be real, Joelle, when I talk, look, we have a spectrum of economics within our community. Some of us have been more fortunate than others. That's just fact. I put more accountability comes as you've been more fortunate. So if that means you have to drive a couple of extra miles, and so be it, because you have to reach the merchant, our ancestors did a whole hell lot more than that. Like, so we have to be comfortable being a little bit uncomfortable. But I think it is like looking yourself and think about, because that changes your economic mindset every day. When you're spending money, what little amounts, and don't think it's just a small purchase. A thing as small as milk and eggs and stuff from your local merchant, or the earrings that you have on your ears, it matters because it accumulates. Then that does matter what our numbers are. Because if every single person starts doing that, think about compound interest. You think it's just one, no, then it's 5, then it's 10, that's 100,000, it's 100,000. Wow, we just turned a business into $1 million business.
I love that, because I think it's where I am even on some of the boycotts too. I'd rather focus less on what we don't do and more on what we could do, where we should go, and how that ultimately does compound not only the wealth that we can create and circulate, but the economic power that fuels change that we will be a part of. So my sum it up, I'm going to take it back to Salt and Peppa, because if anyone has access to them, I would love a new song. Let's talk about wealth. Let's talk about economic power. Let's talk about our economic position. And I think the questions that I leave us with, and what I sum it up with, is who's got control? Who's got a say? Who's stacking the assets each and every day? It's us. And it's time to claim economic power. We can change the game. And you, Harry, have helped us see that as an organization. I hope that today is the first of many conversations where that mindset shift to us owning and recognizing what economic power we really have is step one in a long journey of what is to come. So I want to thank everyone for joining. Harry, like always, you are my guru in all things economic power. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week with another Sum It Up. Thank you all.
Take care.
Take care.